Gentlemen, welcome back. You're back with MGTOW Money. Today we'll be talking about how to lose your money and possibly your sanity. Before we get to that though, I want to thank all of you who bought me a cup of coffee based upon the past video, as well as of course my continued Patreon supporters. Please see the description of this video. Buy me a cup of coffee. Consider becoming a Patreon supporter of this channel because we are moving this forward. Let's move on to today's topic about how to lose your money and possibly your sanity. Recently, I was out traveling, and among other places that I visited, it was the middle of the day, it's the middle of the week, and I was in Wellington, New Zealand. And I'm walking up the steps to the Parliament building there in Wellington, and there is a sole single man there protesting. And I thought, what's this man protesting? Among other things, the man was protesting, guess what, gentlemen? The injustice of the family court system. So here I am in the middle of what I perceived as nowhere. No one's hardly around, and it's me and this man. And I can't validate this man's experiences or his claims, his arguments, etc. But it all sounded very familiar to the type of thing that we've heard so many times about the total injustice throughout the Western world of the family court system. And what it got me to further thinking about is what single decision is one of the most difficult that you as a man need to make in your life. And I emphasize this is a decision that you need to think about. And specifically, that decision is, do you want to have children? That should be a logical, as best you can do it, a logical, rational decision. It should not be a spur-of-the-moment decision. And I'm going to get to some ideas on it in just a second. Before I do so, though, I want to recognize that probably 20% of you probably already have children. And so I can only say, although I don't have children, I can only recommend, of course, do your very best in raising your children. I would emphasize for you to always consider the golden rule, do unto others. In other words, do unto your children as you want them to do to you, because that's extremely important, in particular from a long-term perspective, because your children at some point will be 18 years old, they will be out of the house, and you presumably want to have a positive relationship with them. Furthermore, I'm going to include a link in the description to a book on the long-term effects of divorce on children. I'm going to get into divorce in just a second, but the long-term effects on children of divorcees is very undeniable. And Judith Wallerstein has done terrific research on this. Again, you'll see a link in the description to one of her books. All right, so for the 80% of you that do not have children, let's think about this. Because although this is a very personal, very specific decision to you and your circumstances, etc., society, of course, offers dozens of reasons to have children. You want to leave a legacy. Of course, you want to please your parents. Children, of course, theoretically bring so much joy and happiness. As a friend of mine told me, he feels like Superman when his two daughters come up to him, etc. And I believe all that, and I think that's fantastic. But let me give you three counter arguments that I think at least you need to consider about not having children. Again, coming from the perspective of a man who is well past middle-aged who does not have children. Number one, in particular in the Western world, chances, of course, are reasonably high you will end up divorced, and therefore, assuming that you have children, that you are only going to see those children during their growth time, up until 18 years old. You're probably only going to see those children post-divorce 50% of the time at best, under the best of circumstances. So in other words, you and your ex-spouse are going to end up splitting your custody of those children. And that's assuming, of course, that you get into a family court system that doesn't end up being a kangaroo court and goes against you, and your wife ends up being the primary custodian, and then you'll end up seeing your child maybe once a week at best. Don't be surprised, gentlemen. These types of family court kangaroo type decisions where they get hammered against the man because, yes, the family court system is definitely rigged against men. Don't take my word for it. Just Google family court decisions or men in family courts, and you can see for your own self the type of disasters that can take place. So I want to emphasize the amount of time that you're actually going to see your child probably, the probabilities are probably going to be at half the time of their growing experience. Number two, having children, of course, I've mentioned this before, is expensive. I've read some articles that suggest it costs over $200,000 USD over a child's lifetime in terms of up until year 18 for them on money that you've had to spend on them. Yes, of course. It may not cost you actually $200,000, but let's just say it's $100,000 or whatever it might be. The bottom line is, gentlemen, it's going to cost you a significant amount of money. And if you have any desire to retire early at a relatively young age, it is going to be a huge hill to climb, a very, very significant challenge to you if you choose to have children. Let me mention number three. Children, of course, are a free agent. I know all of you have this idea, well, my son or daughter is going to be an Einstein, a Mozart, or some tremendous world-class athlete. That, of course, is just like me saying, I just bought the winning lottery ticket for tomorrow's drawing. The chances are very, very, very small. They're almost negligible that's going to happen. What's, of course, probably going to happen is your daughter, your son is just going to be like any of the rest of us. They're going to be a regular person. They're going to have a mediocre life. It'll be fine. Nothing good, nothing bad, and they'll just pass along like the rest of us. And frankly, that'll be the end of you and your legacy. However, going back to that potential for greatness, some sort of superb athlete, some sort of apex mind, etc. Remember, of course, you've got the other side of that equation. You could, of course, end up with some sort of terrible child, some sort of child that commits horrific crimes, etc., or just who turns out to be a very, very poor performing person. Let me give you an example straight from my own family. I have a couple of cousins born to mother and father, never divorced, both of whom very similar ages, one of whom has turned out to be a well-degreed, highly respected professional engineer. The other one has ended up being, unfortunately, an alcoholic, drug addict, a total monster of society, if you will. So again, the point is, you don't know what you're going to end up with, gentlemen. Children truly are free agents, irrespective of what you might believe or what you might hope for. So let's quickly sum up here, gentlemen. Having children is, of course, and I emphasize this, a deeply personal, emotional decision. But I encourage you at least to consider some of the counter arguments not to do so. Your decisions might change as you get older, but if nothing else, keep these things in mind. Having children is not necessarily a one-way ticket to happiness, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There is a good chance that you'll end up only seeing your children 50% of their lives in terms of as they're growing up, at best, as I mentioned, in the cases of divorce. They, of course, are expensive, and unless you're planning on working till you're 70 plus years old, you really ought to consider not having children. Furthermore, lastly, as I mentioned, don't get away from the idea that just because you think that you're going to have children and they're going to turn out great and you're going to have this fantastic legacy living well beyond your lifetime, within a couple of generations, number one, you're going to be forgotten, and number two, you truly don't know how your kids are going to turn out. Period. End of story. Gentlemen, as always, I want to sincerely thank you for listening, and I hope you will buy me a cup of coffee. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the like button. As always, John Galt out.